Now, two pigeons bemoaning the fact you can stream DirecTV satellite-free.
These humans can stream all the top-rated national news channels on DirecTV, and now with no satellite dish.
This just in. Weather, sports, election coverage. DirecTV has it all, but something is missing. The satellite dish.
What are you doing?
I'm reporting the news. Back to you, Bob.
Here's some news. You're a buffoon.
Stream the top-rated national news channels. No satellite dish. Visit DirecTV.com. Internet required. Top-rated news based on 2023 Nielsen ratings.
It feels like you can get your credit scores anywhere these days. Random websites, card statements, budgeting apps, heck, even your dog might bark out a few numbers. It's true. Credit Karma isn't the only place you can find them. But we actually do more with your scores to help you find your next financial opportunity. Like a more rewarding credit card, a game plan that helps you pay down debt faster, or a personal loan to help you save more on interest payments each month. Cha-ching! The possibilities are kinda endless. Download Intuit Credit Karma today to get started.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 175 of Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. And I am once again flying solo for this episode of Chalk Talk. Mark is out traveling. We'll be able to hook up with him again next week. But I'm going to run through these games from yesterday, especially the NFC East games, and give you guys the top things that you need to know from the weekend in case you missed it, in case you were locked in on the Eagles game, missing the other 1 o'clock games. So we're going to dive into it. As always, and especially when Mark is out, you guys drop comments here. You can sort of be my co-hosts, if you will, my virtual co-hosts for this game. And so I do want to mention before we dive into this episode, if you're watching here live, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure you go subscribe to the Eagles Pin Pull Network podcast feed. You're going to get 8 long-form shows as well as a weekly 10-minute show every morning called The Checkdown. So there's a lot of great Eagles content coming your way, from this NFL recap to post-game shows to Eagles X's and O's to preview shows to interview shows with people that cover the opposing team. It's all going to be here, so make sure you are following. You can also follow us on YouTube if you're listening to this on a podcasting platform, at Eagles Pin Pull on YouTube. That is my old YouTube channel. I converted over, so I had some people asking what happened to my channel. I just changed the name and the logo, but it's where all of my content is going to be moving forward. So there's the self-promotion stuff. Let's dive into it. And typically we stay away from the Eagles portion of these games. Like, typically what we've done is talked about the other NFC teams, but now that the Eagles are playing some of these other NFC teams, we're going to talk about it some more. And so we're going to dive in here with the Eagles' victory at the Meadowlands, 28-3 over the Giants. And I won't speak too much on the Eagles side of things. Most of you have probably already heard me on the post-game show give my initial thoughts. And again, if you haven't, go check in, go listen to that. It was fun to celebrate a win, the first win by more than a possession in 364 days. And so I won't talk too much about that. You're going to hear me later this week breaking it down in depth on my X's and O's shows with Johnny, on Birds of the Round Table tonight. And so there's going to be a lot of things to talk about. But I do have to mention Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley rushed for 176 yards on 17 carries with 92 rushing yards over expectation in this game. He had a 53% rushing success rate and generated positive 0.53 EPA per rush. Now, he outgained his former team. He outscored his former team. and he hit 21.93 miles per hour on the GPS on his 55-yard run, which is the second fastest ball carrier speed this season. He, by the way, also owns the number 5 rush on that list and number 19. So 3 of the top 20 speeds this season reached by a ball carrier are Saquon Barkley. He's also got 3 runs of over 50 yards this season. I think I saw the stat that in the last 3 years combined, the Eagles have 0 50-plus yard runs. And so Saquon Barkley has been a revelation for this team. And it wasn't just Barkley. Kenny Gainwell had a good game running the ball. And overall, the Eagles' top 2 running backs rushed for 232 yards on 30 carries, which is 7.7 yards per carry. And they did that while missing 2 offensive line starters. Jordan Mailata on IR. Mekhi Becton exits the game early with a concussion. And they also did it against a run defense that ranked top 10 in both EPA and DVOA against the run. And so this was a masterclass performance for Statland University. There was a lot more pistol, a lot more under center. We'll break down all of those scheme things later in the week. But it's nice to see the Eagles finding that identity. On the Giants side of things, the Giants offense is just in trouble without Andrew Thomas. Daniel Jones entered the day with 14 sacks. He was sacked 7 times in this game. Drew Lock came in relief of him. He was also sacked once. And so it's just a disaster for the Giants. Tyrone Tracy only had 23 rushing yards. This offense looked terrible. Andrew Thomas is probably going to be out for the year, and I don't really know where the Giants go from there. Like, you could conceivably have a passable offensive line with Thomas, who's a very good left tackle, but once he's out, the dominoes just start to fall. And it does really make you appreciate what the Eagles are able to do with Jordan Mailata leaving and how it doesn't just totally wreck the offense. Speaking of wrecking offenses, though, I've got to talk about probably my favorite non-Eagle in the league, and I think he's the best non-quarterback in the league, the most impactful non-quarterback in the league. It's Dexter Lawrence. Dexter Lawrence went off in this game. He had 5 pressures on the Eagles. He had 2 sacks on 17 pass rushes, which is his highest sack rate since opening day in 2020. He also stuffed a tush push down at the goal line. Now, they got in on the next one, so it didn't matter. But if anybody's going to stop the tush push, it's probably Dexter Lawrence. And he's a fun guy to watch play. I'd love to see him somewhere that's not New York so I could fully and openly root for him instead of having to couch those takes. But that's it. Just kind of a disaster for the Giants. They dropped to 2-5, and the offense looks really, really bad. I'm not sure where they go moving forward. So let's move on to the other game in the division. It is the Washington Commanders hosting the Carolina Panthers, and they roll in this game 40-7, even without Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels led an opening drive field goal to take a 10-0 lead. And yes, I said that right. He led an opening drive field goal drive to put the Commanders up 10-0 because Andy Dalton threw a pick 6 prior to that. But he opened the game with a 46-yard rush, and he didn't take a big hit. But I don't know if he kind of like slid as somebody grabbed his arm and he rolled over. I don't know if he landed on a ball or something, but there was some sort of rib injury, and he ended up leaving the game. And Marcus Mariota came in, and Marcus Mariota just torched the Panthers defense. He ends up going 18 of 23 for 205 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did take 1 sack. And so, Cliff Kingsbury has this offensive unit playing really well. Now, again, it's a terrible defense, but to be able to do that with your backup quarterback is impressive. And so things are working well for the Washington offense. They had 421 yards of offense. They went 5 of 10 on third downs. And, hopefully Jaden Daniels is back next week. I saw the x-rays were negative, so I would assume that he would be. It would really stink if the NFL flexed the Commanders-Bears game to the afternoon slot to get Jaden Daniels versus Caleb Williams, number 1 overall versus number 2 overall. And all of a sudden, Jaden Daniels is out with an injury. So hopefully he comes back. I'm really looking forward to watching that game next weekend. But back to this game, this is also the 3rd time in 4 weeks that the Commanders' defense has allowed less than 14 points. And we've talked before about some of the players that they added on the defensive side of the ball, and Dan Quinn being a good defensive coach, but still just a general lack of talent, especially in the secondary. And could they get it all together? Well, in 3 of the last 4 weeks, less than 14 points allowed. Now, it's worth mentioning that those games were against the Cardinals, Browns, and Panthers, who ranked 15th, 27th, and 32nd in offensive DVOA, and that they gave up nearly 500 yards of offense to Baltimore last week. And so I don't know how much you take from this game, but it is always good to beat up on a bad opponent. And there's a lot of teams that aren't doing that. And so the Commanders roll in this one. For the Panthers side of things, there's really not much to talk about. JT Sanders had a good game. Their rookie tight end, 6 receptions for 61 yards. And so you like to see that. He's a guy that I really liked in the draft. I would have liked to have seen him end up in Philadelphia. But it's time for the Panthers to put Bryce Young back out there. Andy Dalton was horrific in this game, throws 2 interceptions, takes 2 sacks, under 100 yards passing. If you're just totally out on Bryce Young, if he is done, then okay, maybe you leave Andy Dalton out there to see what you can get out of Xavier Legette and JT Sanders. Like, those are rookies you're trying to develop. But I don't think that Andy Dalton's giving you much at this point. Put Bryce Young back out there. There's like a 90% chance you're sitting with a top 3 pick taking a quarterback this draft, but at least you can say you tried. You gave it your best shot with Bryce Young. All right, that's going to do it for the NFC East portion of the show, because the Cowboys were on a bye week, so they couldn't lose, although if any team could figure it out, it would be the Cowboys. So we'll roll on to the rest of the NFL slate. And again, you guys can drop comments about some of these games if you have them. As we move along, let's go to New Orleans, the Superdome, as Sean Payton makes his return on Thursday Night Football to New Orleans, and he walks out with a 33-10 victory in what was honestly a really boring game. I think the main takeaway from this one is that the Saints season has just gone off the rails. They've lost 5 straight games. They've scored less points in those 5 games than they did in the first 2 games, which they won. So 45.5 points per game in the first 2 games to 15.8 points per game in the 5 since. The Saints are really banged up. They entered this game down a quarterback, 2 offensive linemen, and 2 receivers. Then they lost Paulson Adebo to a broken leg. They lost Marshawn Lattimore to a hamstring injury. This is just a bad place for the Saints to be. This is a team that needed to reset a couple years ago, and they just refused to do so. Like, you can kick contracts into the future. Eventually, you have to take your medicine and reset your roster. And this is just something that should have been done when Drew Brees retired. It's something that should have been done a couple of years ago instead of signing Derek Carr. And here the Saints are stringing together another subpar season. And there's no easy way out. Like, it's going to take them at least a year or two once they decide to pull the plug here. And so it tough to be a Saints fan right now, because your team is going nowhere this year, and they're going to have to get back in a couple of years. It's going to take them a couple of years to get these bad contracts off the books. On the Broncos side, we've got Daniel asking, is there any reason to believe in Bo Nix? I think Bo Nix has looked really rough. He's 16-26 for 164 yards in this game. He did rush 10 times for 75 yards. I don't like Bo Nix. I think I had a 3rd round grade on Bo Nix. I thought they way overdrafted him. But, I mean, at this point, they've got a really good defense. You're 4-3. If Bo Nix just doesn't turn the football over, you can probably go win some games with this defense. And this is a defense that was missing Patrick Surtain. But they still turned in a really strong performance. They're only allowing 15.1 points per game this season, which is 3rd best in the NFL. And you can go a long ways with a defense that good as long as your quarterback doesn't turn it over. Just ask the Steelers. The Steelers keep making the playoffs with abysmal quarterback play and a great defense. And so I don't like Bo Nix, but I do think he's in a decent situation with Sean Payton as his head coach, a guy who's worked with Drew Brees in the past, with a really strong defense to take a shot at this thing. So not a Bo Nix believer, but I think as long as your defense can play well and your rushing attack can be okay, Javonte Williams, 14 for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game, you can make it work. But I think when you get Bo Nix in a must-pass situation, it looks pretty bad, generally speaking. So, okay, let's get on to New England traveling to London to face the Jags, and what is essentially like a home game for the Jags. They have back-to-back games in London. They play in London all the time, it feels like. And talk about a slow start for an offense. Jacksonville only ran 5 plays in the first quarter. New England opens with an 11-play touchdown drive. The Jags run 5 plays and punt. And then New England has a 12-play field goal drive to jump out to a 10-0 lead. But after that, Jacksonville gets going. They scored 22 points in the second quarter, and this was never really a close game again. The Jags just dominated the trenches in this game. Tank Bigsby rushed for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns, while the Patriots' leading rusher was Drake May with 18 yards. Now, Ramondre Stevenson also had 18 yards. So they're technically tied, but it sounds better or worse, I guess, if you say Drake May was the leading rusher. I thought Drake May looked really good again. He had very little support in this game. No rushing attack like we spoke about. But he goes 26 of 37 passing for 276 yards and 2 touchdowns with 0 turnovers. He took 2 sacks. One of his touchdown passes was a beautiful throw. It was a 3rd and 15 from the 22-yard line. And he layers a post route over a cornerback in front of the safety, throwing it before the break on the post. It was a beautiful pass. And I think Drake May's looked really good through 2 games. And this is why Drake May should have been starting to start with. And maybe you say, they didn't start him out of the gate because they had a really tough schedule. And maybe there's some truth to that. But I said this guy was the most pro-ready quarterback in the draft. He was my QB2, slightly behind Caleb Williams. And I just think he was ready to play. And I know the supporting cast hasn't been good, but he's got 5 touchdowns in 2 games. And I think the stat was that Jacoby Brissett had 2 touchdowns in 5 games. And so they're just reciprocals of each other here. And Drake May becomes the only quarterback in NFL history with 500 plus passing yards and 5 plus touchdowns through 2 career starts. He's only the second guy to do that. I'll let you think for a second who you think the other guy might be. And then I'll tell you it's Dan Marino. And so Drake May joins Dan Marino. Anytime you're in a stat with Dan Marino, unless it is Super Bowl rings, that's a pretty good place to be. So Daniel asks, the Patriots defense doesn't seem to be as imposing this year. Any reason why? Bill Belichick's gone. And for everything I say about Bill Belichick as a general manager and, his inability, ultimately as a head coach, because down the stretch, it just got stale and he wouldn't hire people he didn't know. And so he couldn't get in good offensive coordinators, but he's a defensive genius. And so losing Bill Belichick's a big step back. The offense has been really bad. I think that all contributes to things. It's just not a very good roster, but I do think Drake May looks really good. I'm excited to watch him, and Patriots fans should be excited to watch him throughout the rest of the season. Jags fans, I don't know what you're excited for. Trevor Lawrence looked good in this game, I guess. Your ground game looked good. You get that second win to go to 2-5, but it's going to be a massive uphill battle to try to make the playoffs. And it's hard to feel like this isn't a wasted season that's just going to result in coaching changes at the end of the year. So, okay, let's go on to Atlanta, where the Seattle Seahawks beat the Atlanta Falcons 34-14. The Falcons came out in the second half, trailing 17-7. And they went on a 79-yard touchdown drive where Kirk Cousins went 7 of 7. That pulled the score to 17-14. Unfortunately, it was all downhill from there. They let Seattle answer back. Then they went 3 and out. And then they had a fumble 6. And then they had back-to-back interceptions. And one of those was on Drake London. It hit him in the hands. But it was just a disaster as they fell apart. Seattle bounces back in a get-right game here. They were coming off of 3 consecutive losses after opening the year 3-0. In those 3 losses, they gave up 35 points per game. In this game, they forced 3 turnovers. They scored a defensive touchdown, and they held Atlanta, who's been pretty good this year, to 14 points. They did allow 385 yards of offense, and so they benefited from those turnovers I mentioned. But it is a step in the right direction as they try to right the ship and they cling to a 1-game lead in the division after the 49ers lost to the Chiefs, which we'll get to in a minute. Geno Smith was 18 of 28 in this game for 207 yards and 2 touchdowns. He only took 1 sack. despite being pressured on 50% of his dropbacks. And this is the first game for Geno this season where he has had multiple passing touchdowns. So maybe a get-right game for the offense. Maybe it's a get-right game for the defense. Maybe the Seahawks can push for the division against, as San Francisco continues to flounder here a little bit. But we'll get to that in a minute. So let's go on to Tennessee at Buffalo. And Buffalo trailed a Mason Rudolph-led Titans team 10-0 after opening the game with 3 straight 3-and-outs. And then they scored 34 unanswered points. Amari Cooper, the new trade acquisition for the Bills, had 1 target in the first half, and he dropped that target. But then he had 4 catches on 4 targets for 66 yards and a touchdown in the second half. Rookie Keon Coleman went off, had 4 for 125 yards and a touchdown, or no touchdown, sorry, but that was on 7 targets. Good performance for the Bills offense, despite the slow start. Mason Rudolph, I thought he was sharp early in this game. He was 18 of 23 for 155 yards and a touchdown at halftime. In the second half, he was only 7 of 17 for 60 yards. And this is a Titans team that's just been beat up. Jalen Duncan became their 3rd starting right tackle in 6 games, and then he left with an injury, and they brought in their 4th right tackle who gave up 8 pressures. Will Levis this is just a banged up team that wasn't good to begin with. And my takeaway from this game is that the Titans need to trade DeAndre Hopkins. They're a bad team with a 32-year-old wide receiver that just simply doesn't fit their timeline. They don't have a young quarterback whose development is going to be hampered by trading him. Will Levis is not the guy. This is a team that also is probably going to have a top 3 pick. They're also probably going to take a quarterback in this draft. Hanging on to DeAndre Hopkins isn't really helping you here. You've got Calvin Ridley to help you out next year. I think you just move on from DeAndre Hopkins at this point. Trade targets, I think the Chiefs make a lot of sense because they've got nothing. The Chargers could make sense. The Steelers could make sense. Like, there's a lot of teams that would probably be interested in Hopkins at the trade deadline. That's a move I'd like to see the Titans make sometime in the next few weeks. Okay, let's go to Cleveland, where the Cincinnati Bengals beat the Cleveland Browns 21-14. Cincinnati's offense struggled for the 2nd straight week. Last week, they only put up 17 points against the Giants, and that was a touchdown on the first drive and the last drive with only 3 points on 8 drives in between. This week, they were held scoreless in the first half, although they did have a kick return touchdown. That's where that first quarter touchdown is. But the offense was scoreless in the first half. They gained only 86 yards on 6 drives before they scored 2 touchdowns in the third quarter. Deshaun Watson left this game in the first half with a torn Achilles. The Browns turned to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who was a disaster, going 11 of 24 for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then he left the game with an injury. An emergency third quarterback, Jameis Winston, was forced into action, and he was better, 5 of 11, 67 yards and a touchdown. The Browns became the first team since 2008 to have 3 quarterbacks attempt 10 or more passes in a game. And I mean, just leave it to the Browns to have their best quarterback on the team as QB3. But I would imagine this will be the Jameis Winston show for the rest of the year. I also just don't think it'll matter. The Browns are kind of a dumpster fire as well. On the Bengals side, the question is, can the Bengals play complementary football for a change? Like weeks 1 through 5, the offense was on fire. They scored 28 points per game, but they went 1-4 because the defense gave up 29 points per game. Now in the last 2 weeks, the defense has gotten better. They've only given up 10.5 points per game, but the offense has only scored 19 points per game against the Browns, who are a good defense, and the Giants, but it's just they cannot get on the same page at the same time, and that's why they're a 3-4 football team. But they do have a pathway, and they do play the Eagles next week, and so that'll be a fun game to watch. Eagles X's and O's, chimes in and says that the Bengals should not be favorites in that game. Says the Bengals offense functions like the Bucs offense, but the Eagles defensive backs are playing tighter than they did before, and tackling will be a huge factor. And yeah, that's absolutely true. As you look ahead to the Eagles-Bengals game at 1:00 next week, there's a lot of similarities in how those offenses function. Ultimately, The Bucs have a way better defense than the Bengals, though. I think that the last two games notwithstanding. So we'll see what happens with that game. It's not a must-win game for the Bengals, but it's a game they really need to have to get back to 500 as they fight for a playoff spot, a wild card spot in the AFC. Got a comment here coming in from Impulse, says, don't forget to like the video, y'all. Shane deserves it. I promise you that's not my burner account, but yeah, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. We certainly appreciate it a lot. Okay, let's move on to Green Bay, where the Houston Texans faced off with the Green Bay Packers, and this game went down to the wire. Green Bay ends up winning 24-22, and down 2 points with 8 minutes left. The Texans went on a 13-play, 45-yard drive that burned 6.5 minutes off, but then they kicked a 35-yard field goal with under 2 minutes left, and they played for the field goal. They had first and goal. They have a 2-yard loss on a running play to get to 2nd and 12, and then they run it again and lose 3 more yards to get to 3rd and 15. Then they called a pass play, which falls incomplete. And like at that point, if you're going to be that conservative there, you probably should just call another run play on 3rd and 15 and drain the Packers' last time out. I mean, I don't love playing for the field goal. I understand the field goal gives you the lead there, but on 2nd and 12, I'm throwing the football. Again, CJ Stroud didn't have a good day passing, and we can talk about that certainly, but I didn't like how they managed the end of this game, but they do kick the field goal. Minute 44 left. They kick the ball back to Green Bay, and Green Bay drives down and hits a 45-yard field goal as time expired. And, maybe one of the reasons you're running the ball is CJ Stroud, the passing offense was just a disaster. They're 10 of 21 in this game for 86 yards and took 4 sacks. And meanwhile, Joe Mixon was averaging 4.6 yards per carry, but his final 5 rushes went for negative yardage. And so the offense really struggled in this game. They did score 22 points, but they had a 6-yard field goal drive after an interception. They had an 11-yard touchdown drive after a muffed punt, and then a 23-yard field goal drive after a kick return. And so the offense just did not move the ball well. The Packers were able to rack up all kinds of pressure on CJ Stroud, and the Texans are going to have to figure some things out there. On the Packers side, Jordan Love, he continues to be kind of up and down. He's 24 of 33 for 220 yards and 3 touchdowns in this game, which would be a great day in the office if not for the 2 interceptions that he threw. And so, you get a good mix with Jordan Love of explosive plays and some boneheaded plays. And he hasn't quite been able to stabilize and get rid of those dumb plays so far this season. But the Packers are 5-2 anyways. The Texans are 5-2 as well. The Texans have a pretty banged up defense right now. And so if they can get healthy, they can certainly go on a run. And, I think they all but have their division wrapped up anyways. But the Packers are going to be in a dogfight in that competitive NFC North. We got a comment coming in from Joe Ciccoletti. It says, Jordan Love reminding me a lot of a young Josh Allen, slinging the rock, and it could be great or it could be terrible. Risk versus reward. And I think that's a good assessment. And that's something that I won't say Josh Allen has totally reined in. He still does that from time to time, but by and large, he was able to find that middle road. And I think Jordan Love will too. We got to remember that it's still just his second year starting as well, even though it seems like he's been in the league for forever. So I like Jordan Love. I think the Packers are going to go a long ways this year, but it is hard to fully trust him in some of those situations right now. So, okay, let's keep rolling. Let's go to Indianapolis and talk about the game between the Colts and the Dolphins. This was a brutal game. I hope you didn't watch this game. I hope you were watching some of the other games that were on that were better, but the Colts win this game 16-10. This was an abysmal passing game for Anthony Richardson. He was 10 of 24 passing for 129 yards, and he lost a fumble in the red zone. 65 of his 129 passing yards came on the last 2 drives. Now, those were both field goal drives that helped them take the lead and then extend the lead. And he rushed for 56 yards. But Anthony Richardson as a passer has been really bad. I loved Anthony Richardson coming out in the draft, and it wasn't because I thought he was a great passer. It was just the athleticism. And still hasn't started a lot of games, but his decision making and accuracy is bad. He can't stay healthy. I think Anthony Richardson is probably not much longer for the league. Well, that's probably not true. Somebody's always going to give him a chance because of his athleticism, but unless he makes massive strides as a passer, I just don't see it working out for Richardson as a starting quarterback. But Shane Steichen used him in the run game. They were able to get things going, and they end up scraping by a Dolphins team that was playing their second and then third string quarterback. Tyler Huntley started the game at quarterback. He threw the first touchdown pass the Dolphins have had since week 2. The rushing attack put up 188 yards, but Raheem Mostert fumbled in the third quarter, which led to the Colts' only touchdown on a 28-yard drive. 28-play drive would be something to watch. 28-yard drive. And then after that, Tyler Huntley gets hurt. Tim Boyle entered the game, which how is Tim Boyle still on an NFL roster? Like, how is your third quarterback not like some rookie UDFA or something? How is Tim Boyle still taking snaps in the league? And Tim Boyle went 8 of 13 for 74 yards, and the Dolphins lose yet again. Neither of these teams really inspire me whatsoever. Maybe the Dolphins can get right. I think they said Tua is going to be back next week, but I just don't see it with either of these teams. Even though the Colts sit at 4-3, this offense is just too bad. The quarterback play they're getting from Anthony Richardson is too bad, and I don't think they're a serious contender in this division. Got a comment coming in from Joe Ciccoletti. Says, couldn't agree more. Is Richardson just not ready or that bad? The team looks so much better with Flacco. And I think he's one of those guys that it's on the Trey Lance spectrum of you didn't play a lot in college, right? And there's a correlation between playing college snaps and just snaps and reps that are needed. And then he misses his whole rookie season with injury. The passing was always going to be a work in progress, but you would have hoped that in year 2, even though he loses a lot of year 1 due to injury, you would have hoped the decision-making would have looked a little better, and certainly the accuracy. And I mean, we can throw out the Josh Allen things from his rookie season, but it just didn't look like this for Josh Allen. And I've lost pretty much all my faith in Anthony Richardson to develop as a passer. But I still love to watch him play and watch the athleticism and root for the kid. I just don't think it's going to happen. So sorry, Colts fans, don't yell at me. Let's keep rolling on to what was probably the game of the week. Detroit at Minnesota, and Minnesota enters this game undefeated. Detroit trails them by a game for the division, and it all went Minnesota's way early. Detroit falls in a hole, 10-0. They decided to dial up a fake punt on 4th and 7 on their opening drive from their own 33-yard line, which on the spectrum of like dumb Dan Campbell decisions is up there with going for 2 on tilt after the penalty against the Cowboys last year. Like, terrible decision to start the game. You give the ball to the Vikings on a short field. You go 3 and out on your next 2 drives. You're down 10-0. But then the Lions offense got going, and they scored a touchdown on 4 straight possessions to take the lead. Jared Goff was blitzed on 55% of his dropbacks in this game. The Brian Flores defense is going to dial up pressure, but Goff answered that pressure, was 13 of 15 passing against the blitz, and he was 22 of 25 overall. His passer rating of 140 in this game. It's his 3rd straight game at 140 or better passer rating. And he joins only Aaron Rodgers, Kurt Warner, and Roger Staubach as the only quarterbacks to do that 3 times. No one has done it 4 times in a row. And Rodgers and Warner both won MVPs in their season when they did it. So I'm not saying Jared Goff's going to win the MVP, but he's playing really efficient football right now. You look over at the Vikings side, Sam Darnold's box score is fine. Like, he's 22 of 27 for 259 yards and a touchdown with an interception. But the interception was he missed a running back on the interception. He took a sack that forced them out of field goal range. He missed Justin Jefferson on the last drive. And when you start out up 10-0, you just want to be able to push that out. And they just couldn't do it. And late in the game, the defense gave the Vikings a lead. They have a strip sack. They returned for a touchdown. And then they got a 3 and out, and you've got the lead. But the Vikings offense couldn't pick up a first down, and they punted it right back and gave the Lions a chance to win the game, which, of course, they went and did. It is interesting to keep an eye on the Lions defense after Aiden Hutchinson leaves with an injury. I still think this is a team that they should absolutely make a move for an edge rusher at the trade deadline. They're a team that is in a win now window, especially with who knows what's going to happen with Ben Johnson after this season. You thought you were going to lose him last year and you didn't. You're probably on borrowed time, but for now, their response was to blitz on 57% of Sam Darnold's dropbacks. And it's the highest rate that Aaron Glenn's defense has blitzed since week 1 of 2021. And it did not work early in this game. They had only 4 pressures on 14 blitzes in the first 3 quarters. But in the fourth quarter, it did work. They got 3 sacks on 6 blitzes as they were able to get out of the game with a win. And so the Lions now sit atop the NFC North by courtesy of the tiebreaker. They're tied by record. And again, what is an insanely competitive and really fun to watch division. These two teams are going to meet up again later this season, and it's going to be must-watch football. Eagles X's and O's says it was a Ben Johnson masterclass and that Dan Campbell is a lunkhead. Yeah, I have a hard time with Campbell because I generally like him. Like, I like his personality. I like his, there's no doubt that he's had a huge impact on the culture in Detroit. He just makes some of the most, and I generally like aggressiveness, but he just makes some of the most stupidly aggressive decisions, like a fake punt on your own 33-yard line on 4th and 7. It was a speed option too. It wasn't like, oh, we've seen on film that they just don't like jam our gunners or something like that, and we could throw a quick little pass by an nutback. They tried to run a speed option from a fake punt on 4th and 7. I hated the call. They were able to dig out of that hole though. So, okay, let's keep rolling here. One last comment here. Eric says, Ben Johnson had like 10 awesome concepts to beat that creeper pressure. Yeah, Ben Johnson's phenomenal, man. I don't know where he's going to end up, but every team that has a head coach opening should be after Ben Johnson this offseason. They should have all been after him last season too. So, okay, let's go on to Los Angeles, where the Rams hosted the Raiders and they get a win 20-15. Aiden O'Connell was injured in this game. He broke his thumb. And so Gardner Minshew was inserted back into the lineup, and he went 15-34 for 154 yards and had 3 interceptions. The Raiders were remarkably passive in this game. They kicked field goals on 4th and 5 from the 9-yard line, down 8 early in the fourth quarter, which maybe that one makes sense. But then they again kicked a field goal on 4th and goal from the 9, down 5 with 2:46 left. Per analytical models, they yielded 5.4% win probability by kicking in that situation. It's even worse. It was 4th and goal from the 4 before a penalty. Kyron Williams had 21 carries for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns for the Rams in this game. He now has a rushing touchdown in 9 straight games, which is the 4th longest streak of all time. And I'll let you guys, you can pause if you're listening. I'll give you a second if you're watching live to think who might have had the longer streaks. And it is Priest Holmes with 11. Jonathan Taylor also has 11. And then LaDainian Tomlinson with 18. So he's halfway to the LaDainian Tomlinson streak. He needs it in 3 more games just to get past Priest Holmes and Jonathan Taylor. Brock Bowers had 10 catches for 93 yards in this game, but the Raiders just don't have anything else. This is a disaster football team. I kind of don't think Antonio Pierce survives this season. To be honest with you, I thought his game management was bad. And also at the end of the day, like, you get the interim coach bump. It feels like hiring the interim. I need to go look up the numbers on this, but it feels like hiring the interim head coach just almost never works out. On the Rams side, Jared Verse had 9 pressures on 36 pass rush attempts in this game. And I believe he's the current leader in Rookie of the Year odds. And, he's been really good for the Rams on defense. Joe Ciccoletti says this was a massive win for the Rams. It wasn't pretty by any means, but they needed it to still have chances for playoff hopes. You have Kupp returning and Puka soon as well. They could be scary in the future. Yeah, I mean, if Jared Verse continues to play well, if you can continue to develop your defense, you always think Matthew Stafford has a chance to get really hot. And it's just going to be really hard when Tutu Atwell is your leading catcher on the team. But Getting Puka Nacua, getting Cooper Kupp back will be huge for the team. So let's go on to a Super Bowl rematch in the Kansas City Chiefs at the San Francisco 49ers. But guys, the Chiefs defense is special, which is good because their offense isn't. But this was the 27th straight game they've allowed less than 28 points. They shut down the 49ers run game. Jordan Mason had 58 yards on 14. I mean, it's 4.1 yards per carry. I guess that's not like shut down, but it's not what you expect from the 49ers. The 49ers in the game with only 101 rushing yards. 14 of that went to Kyle Juszczyk on one play. Brock Purdy rushed for 27 yards. And so I think we can say by 49ers standards, they shut down the 49ers rushing attack, and they pressured Brock Purdy relentlessly. They intercepted him 3 times. They allowed only 56 yards on the 49ers' first 6 drives. And for the 49ers, their injury situation is just a disaster. Deebo Samuel only played 3 snaps, which his was an illness that shouldn't be a lingering thing, but it was bad for this game. Brandon Ayuk goes down before halftime with what I think they said that it's expected to be an ACL injury. I don't think I've seen that definitively confirmed, but he's likely out for the year. Christian McCaffrey is still out. Brock Purdy had no chemistry with the guys that are left on the team at receiver, and he went only 5 of 14 passing against man coverage in this game with 3 interceptions. And so you throw sand in the gears of the 49ers offense here by a really good defense, and it just fell apart. Now, Patrick Mahomes wasn't much better. He's 16 of 27 for 154 yards with 2 interceptions, although in all fairness, one of his interceptions was tipped, and on one of them his receiver fell down. So take that for what it's worth. But Noah Gray, who is their tight end 2, was the only player in this game with over 25 yards receiving for the Chiefs. Again, they need to go get DeAndre Hopkins. They got to do something. With Rashee Rice out, Travis Kelce just looks bad this season. Xavier Worthy is a rookie that just hasn't started the year great. They need something. This is a team that needs to go make a move at the deadline for a wide receiver. Your defense can't stay this good forever. Patrick Mahomes' contract is going to continue to increase in what it's hitting your cap for each year. Go win some more Super Bowls while you've got a really good... I mean, you've always got a chance with Mahomes, but it's time to push the chips in and go make a move. Patrick Mahomes became only the second quarterback in the last 30 years to throw more interceptions than touchdowns, while also leading his team to a 6-0 start. The other guy was Peyton Manning in 2015. So fun stat there. Another fun stat, unless you're a 49ers fan, is that the 49ers are now 0-40 when they trail by 8 or more points at any point in the fourth quarter under Kyle Shanahan. This is the only team in the NFL without a win in that scenario in that time span. And so if you get up on the 49ers late, they really struggle to come back. This is a team that wants to play from ahead. It's a team that needs the run game to work, and just nothing's working. And everybody's injured right now. And the 49ers fall to 3-4 on the season. So they trail the Seahawks by a game. I don't think it's over for the 49ers if they can get healthy, but it feels like we've been saying if they can get healthy since the preseason, and it just doesn't seem to be happening as the injuries keep piling up. So, all right, and then let's get into the Sunday night football game. And the Steelers made the switch to Russell Wilson in this game, and it was a move I didn't like. I said that, Justin Fields opens up a lot for you in the running game, and I don't think that Russell Wilson's additions in the passing game are enough to offset the loss in the running game. But there's no denying it paid off in his first start. The Steelers put up a season high of 37 points, which is actually their highest point total since week 6 of the 2020 season, when they put up 38 on the Browns, which was a week after they put up 38 on the Eagles. So back-to-back 38-point outings in 2020. This is the highest point total since. And it didn't start well. They opened the game with 3 straight 3-and-outs, but it did pick up after that. Russell Wilson ended the game 16 of 29 for 264 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. He only took 1 sack. He did also have a 3 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. And there were moments that Justin Fields would have probably had a big run, and Russell Wilson didn't. But Russell Wilson was able to unlock George Pickens. He had 5 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown. That touchdown was basically on a jump ball that Russell Wilson threw up into the end zone. And so we'll see if they're able to continue that going forward. I sort of said in jest to Mark off the air that you wonder if they should just run a 2-quarterback system and alternate starts so a guy can have 2 weeks to really hone in on the defense he's about to face and then come in and play. Because it seems like, Russell Wilson has a good game in his first game back. Can he do it over the long term? A lot of times we see a guy come in and have one good game. Maybe you could capture that magic if you just rotated quarterbacks week to week. But we'll see if Russell Wilson can keep the magic going next week. On the Jets side, 2 weeks ago, they fired their head coach and then they lost to the Bills. This week, they trade for Devontae Adams and then they lose to the Steelers. Devontae Adams only had 3 receptions for 30 yards on 9 targets. The defense allowed a season-high 409 yards and 31 unanswered points. And the only guy that really got much going was Breece Hall, and he didn't do it on the ground. He had 100 yards receiving, 6 receptions for 103 yards. This is the Dream Team 2.0 for Eagles fans out there. It's just been a disaster. I'm using the word disaster a lot today, but that's where we're at with a lot of these NFL teams. And the Jets have a get-right game against the Patriots next week. Maybe. Maybe Drake May torches this defense like Russell Wilson did. I don't know. But it might be too little too late for the Jets as they drop to 2-5. And the Steelers, when you hear the Steelers having a really good defensive performance, there's a lot of names you might think of. You might think TJ Watt wrecking the game. He only had 1 tackle. You might think Alex Highsmith. If they doubled TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith probably had a great game, but he only had 3 pressures and no sacks. Maybe Patrick Queen or Minka Fitzpatrick or Joey Porter Jr., but it was Beanie Bishop Jr. who had 2 interceptions of Aaron Rodgers. He also had 6 tackles, and he had 2 passes defensed. And so, really good performance from a guy that you didn't necessarily expect to have a good performance here. It's a name that a lot of people probably didn't even know coming into this game. But he ends up going off, and the Steelers improve to what was the record? 5-2. So there you have it. That is this week's action. Obviously not talking about Monday Night Football because I'm recording Monday afternoon, but tonight we get dual Monday night games. You got the Ravens and the Buccaneers kicking off at 8:15 Eastern, and then the Chargers and the Cardinals kicking off at 9 o'clock Eastern. So 2 games. Hopefully one of them will be a good one. But that's going to do it for this episode of Chalk Talk, episode number 175. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating wherever you stream your podcast. Again, Eagles Pin Pull Network. You can also follow us on Twitter at Eagles Pin Pull. We tweet out clips, promo clips with links to episodes all the time. And so go check that out. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHalfNFL. My YouTube channel is now at Eagles Pin Pull. And I'll catch you guys next week for a Week 8 recap show.